Who built the cages in Springvale Elementary School? In a previous video, I noted that there is no jail in the town of Megaton, despite the fact that the town has a sheriff, and this sheriff places Burke under arrest and instructs him to follow him. Follow him to where exactly? The game never shows, and the developers obviously felt they never had to bother to show because Burke pulls out a hidden gun and kills him, and we, the players, aren't supposed to question it or wonder what was going to happen beyond that. It is lazy world building to not show how the logistics of that world are supposed to function. Whether or not Burke ever actually could end up in jail, such a jail should exist because it makes sense that any town of reasonable size should have something to that effect. As I noted in that video, it should have been fairly easy for Bethesda to slap in a simple jail cell somewhere in Megaton, because the art assets for a jail cell's iron bars clearly exist in the game, so the work of creating this asset has already been done. All someone at Bethesda would have had to do is place that into Megaton, but they were too lazy and/or incompetent to do that. And yet, for some reason, there are jail cells as close as the nearby raider-infested Springvale Elementary. The presence of these jail cells in an elementary school is just about as absurd as the lack of a jail cell in Megaton, so therefore I thought it was worth talking about in its own video. If you're like me, you've played the game and you noted that there are jail cells in this elementary school, and like me, you probably just dismissed it. But it really is a question worth pondering, because why the hell would there be jail cells in an elementary school? I consulted the Fallout Wiki to try to find some answers. Nothing there provides any answers. I could understand if, for some reason, due to the circumstances of the war, the school was repurposed to hold prisoners, and these jail cells were added so it could serve that purpose. During a time of war, education is a very low priority, but the need to hold prisoners, POWs, dissidents, spies, saboteurs, and so on massively increases. So I very much could accept a canon explanation that the school was shut down and converted into a makeshift prison or POW camp or something to that effect. I would accept that answer as very logical and reasonable. But the Fallout Wiki and all the available lore does not say or hint that there was anything to this effect. The canon account is that this was just a normal, typical school, though it got severely damaged, and then it stayed that way, abandoned for the next 200 years or so, until the raiders showed up and decided to make it a base. As is typical in Bethesda's games, you cannot talk with these raiders, and they seem to exist within their own bubble where they just loiter around inside the school all day without actually doing anything that would make any logical sense. There's a lot of stupid things about the world building here. First and foremost, let's look at the fact that this school was just left there abandoned, apparently until recently when the raiders decided to take over. The people in the town of Megaton, for whatever reason, decided to ignore this fairly large and mostly intact structure, and instead chose to live in a crater. According to Manya, this was because the crater somehow provided protection from dust storms, but this makes no logical sense whatsoever because there's no cover over the hole. So dust and shit would bury alive anyone foolish enough to seek shelter there. You cannot have shelter without a roof over your head, which the Megaton crater does not provide. But Springvale Elementary does. Plus, for some reason, that school also includes jail cells, so Sheriff Sims would actually be able to do his job properly instead of summarily executing people without trial, or whatever he does with them. So the fact this free real estate was left abandoned in favor of a hole in the ground is probably the biggest stupid thing about it. Although, I suppose that's more to do with the stupidity of Megaton than Springvale per se, but the same masterminds behind that also made the entire game, so here we are. Aside from the school, every other structure in the town has been mostly destroyed, except the small ranch house where Sarah Silver is hiding out in. Why this one house remains intact, while all the nearby ones were severely destroyed, is beyond me. And this house doesn't have a bathroom. That's a pretty standard feature in any house. Everyone needs to take a shit, right? And there also isn't an outhouse either. So where Sarah does her business is anyone's guess. But it goes to show that Fallout 3 clearly does not have the
care and craftsmanship
that some would have you believe. For her own part, Sarah Silver has absolutely nothing whatsoever in her dialogue tree to say about the school or the raiders living there, which is very strange because they're supposed to be something to fear, right? And they're literally right next to her. You'd think she would have something to say regarding them, but as is so often the case in Bethesda's world design, things that should be hostile or fear other things are placed in very close proximity, and both exist in a bubble and do not interact in any way unless the player somehow disturbs that balance and makes something happen. I cannot stress how utter shit this world design philosophy is. And people like Matt know this, but they disingenuously lie and say that this is better than you think. Bullshit. It's every bit as terrible as you think it is, if not worse. They know this, but they lie about it anyway. So anyway, if we were to assume this world made sense and people didn't just exist in isolated bubbles like they do, then Sarah would be in some deep doo-doo. And not just because she has to crap on the floor and it keeps building up until it buries her alive. But I mean, those raiders you'd think would have some scouts patrolling their territory to be on the lookout for intruders, or so they could be aware of any hapless victims they could raid, because they are raiders after all, right? So they should be trying to be aware of what's going on in the immediate area around the school, and yet they don't. They just hide inside the school and loiter around until the player comes to kill them, and that's the extent of their entire existence. If I was to try to rationalize Sarah Silver living in close proximity to the raiders, my headcanon would be that she is still performing her old profession of prostitution, but now in service of these raiders, and that's why they tolerate her existence, and perhaps they supply her with the chems that we clearly see that she is abusing. By the way, while we're discussing the town of Springvale and the stupidity of its design, I want to briefly point out that there's a refrigerator inside one of the ruined houses, and it apparently contains pre-war food from 200 years ago, and this food is still perfectly edible. You see this sort of shit all over Fallout 3, so it's hardly unique, but this is the very first example of it in the entire game that you can come across right after you exit Vault 101. Imagine you're playing Fallout 3 for the first time and you go to that scenic overlook that Matten praises as the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you see a landscape utterly devastated and barren, as if the nuclear apocalypse happened a few months ago instead of 200 years ago, as is actually the case. Then you drop down. And if you manage to survive the fall, you proceed to the very first ruined house you find, and there, inside of that ruined house, is a refrigerator full of 200-year-old food. Doesn't that just ruin your immersion of this world? Now, back to the Raiders. As I said, they seem to exist in their own isolated bubble and don't interact with Sarah. But I did see in the Fallout Wiki, on the article for the hobo outside of Megaton, that, quote, driven slightly demented by lack of sustenance and fearful of his life after a narrow escape from the Raider gang holed up in the Springvale Elementary School, Mickey made it to the entrance of Megaton by late 2277 and began begging for water. This is what the article on the official Fallout Wiki says, but there is no citation given. I checked every line of Mickey's dialogue, and he never says anything to this effect. So this is either misinformation, where someone vandalized the wiki by adding in this information that isn't true, or this information comes from an uncited source. So this wiki article needs to be corrected either by removing this, if it's vandalism, or give the citation to the source. I'd do it myself, but I gave up on editing wikis years ago because, in my experience, wikis are dominated by asshole moderators with small penises who have to compensate for that by pushing people around to make themselves feel more important than they actually are, just like Reddit moderators. So, because of these sorts of low-life scumbags, my experience with wikis and Reddits have been completely ruined, and I no longer participate in that crap because I don't like dealing with these small dick assholes. But for anyone out there who happens to have a greater tolerance for dealing with these assholes, please correct this article however which way it needs to be corrected. Either remove that if it's false, or give the citation if it's true. I may as well also talk about the letters from Vault-Tec you can find in mailboxes in Springvale, as well as all over the Capital Wasteland. These letters appear to be made out of paper, as you'd expect any letter to be. But, unless these letters were made out of something like asbestos, you'd expect them to be reduced to ash in the fiery inferno of the nuclear apocalypse. Simply being inside of a mailbox should not have been enough to protect them from the searing heat and the elements, like rain, over the course of 200 years. And even if they did survive, why haven't they been looted? Paper would be pretty useful as kindling to start a fire, or to use to wipe your ass, or roll a joint or something. I don't know. These letters being there aren't that big of a deal, but I don't think it's very realistic, and just wanted to comment on that. Now, before I continue any further, I want to mention that while doing my research in the making of this video, I checked to see if anyone else had made any videos on the school. I wanted to see if anyone else had anything to say regarding those jail cells in the school, but of the videos I watched, no one even attempted to explain their existence. But guess who the very first search result in YouTube's corrupt and rigged search algorithm happened to be? Yep, that's right. None other than the classy boy himself, Oxhorn. This was exactly what I expected. Even though I have told YouTube to not recommend me content from his channel, he still comes up as the very first search result when I search for anything Fallout related, most of the time. Go ahead and call it jealousy or whatever you like, but as a content creator myself, I don't think it is particularly fair that the algorithm is clearly rigged the way that it is to give his videos top billing. And why is that the case anyway? He must have some connections at YouTube in order to have his content placed above everyone else. This is not fair to any other content creator, and it is anti-competitive and monopolistic. Way down in the list of results in this YouTube search is a video made by the Nth Apple. This video received a decent amount of views, but this video was made all the way back in 2014. Even though Oxhorn's video is a lot more recent, Oxhorn's video has far more views. Why? Because YouTube gave Oxhorn's video top billing in the algorithm. Someone told me that they've talked to Nth Apple in DM on Twitter, and he told them that the reason he quit making content was because YouTube stopped promoting his content. Apple didn't blame Oxhorn for this drop-off in views, but I think when you look at what is happening here, it is clear that Oxhorn is the reason Apple's views have dropped. Apple's video got a pretty decent amount of views, but remember, this is a video from 2014, and I bet you 90% of those views came from the time before Oxhorn showed up and monopolized everything by rigging the algorithm against his competitors. I don't know the reason why Apple will not speak out against this, and would rather simply just fold and give up instead. He even went as far as making a video claiming Oxhorn wasn't the reason for him quitting. But he's since taken down that video. Why? Because that's not the actual truth, and he knows it. And I know it. It is very obvious what's happened here. All you have to do is search for almost anything having to do with Fallout, and you'll see what I mean. Oxhorn's smug, pretentious face comes up as the first result almost every single time. How is this considered acceptable or right? Anyway, even if Apple doesn't care or want to speak out, I'm a content creator myself, and I'm not okay with this. So even if Apple doesn't speak out, I will, because this is not right or fair. And I'll say that on my own behalf, even if he will not say that on his behalf. Moving on. So, like I said, I wanted to see if anyone had any answers or theories on the jails in the school. And I watched Apple's video, and he did not. I also watched Oxhorn's video, and note, this is the first time I watched one of Oxhorn's videos in like 2 years or something. And he didn't offer anything to explain the jails being in the school either. And his video was heavily modded and pretty much exactly what I expected it would be. He talked in a very creepy way, like someone who shouldn't be allowed within 500 yards of a school. I don't know why he talks like that, but it's not normal. But a few points of note here from Oxhorn's video. Number 1, true to form, at one point in the video, Oxhorn takes a pot shot at Obsidian, even though this is a video about Fallout 3 and has nothing to do with Obsidian. It was bad enough when I seen him do that in the Sunset Sarsaparilla video, where he lied and defamed them over a BOS sticker on a folder caused by one of his mods. But at least this video was about a game Obsidian made, but here he goes out of his way to make the same pot shots and harp on the reuse of assets. Look, they only had 18 months to make the game, and you said in your In Defense of Fallout 4 video that people shouldn't criticize games because they don't make games.
We all have criticisms for games, and we all have ways that we would make the game better. But of course we don't actually go out and make a game. Very few of us do. And yet we feel like we can be critics.
Well, what games have you yourself made, asshole? Yet you hypocritically think you can be a critic against Obsidian. Explain that, you hypocrite. Furthermore, yes, Obsidian reused some assets, but why do you make a big deal out of this and try to imply they, or New Vegas, is shit because of that? They were operating on a tight deadline because Bethesda did not want New Vegas to come out the same year as Skyrim and compete against it. So Bethesda was firm on the 2010 deadline and would not budge. So, with only 18 months to do everything, would it have made sense to squander that limited time by reinventing the wheel and recreating fresh assets that essentially filled the same niche? Or did it make more sense to do what they did and focus on quests and story? I'm glad they prioritized what they did, instead of creating a fresh set of posters, just to appease people like you who have no concept of what an RPG is. And you know what else? There's a saying that goes something to the effect of, "Those that live in glass houses should not throw stones." You can say Obsidian reused art assets, which they were authorized to do and which made logical sense to do given the circumstances, but Bethesda reused the entire fucking franchise. Bethesda couldn't create a post-apocalyptic franchise of their own, so they bought this one, and then they copied and pasted everything from the West Coast into the East Coast instead of coming up with fresh ideas. This is something that the original Fallout creator Tim Kaine himself has criticized Fallout 3 over. And unlike you, he obviously has created a game, so your logical fallacy that only game creators can be game critics doesn't apply to him. I don't agree with your logical fallacy anyway, but I'm just saying that he's obviously exempt from it. His criticism also carries a lot of weight since he created Fallout in the first place. So you whine and cry about the reuse of some posters and such. Big fucking deal. Bethesda, on the other hand, copied and fucking pasted Ghouls, Super Mutants, Brotherhood of Steel, Enclave, FEV, Herald, Caps as currency, and even the fucking desert setting of the Mojave Wasteland into the motherfucking East Coast state of Maryland, where such a setting is stupid as fuck. I think most people would agree that reusing some posters is nowhere near as big a deal as the wholesale copying and pasting Bethesda has done from the originals into this game. But you have 1.5 million subscribers, and YouTube gives your videos top billing in the algorithm as if you're some sort of high and mighty god or something. Fuck you. But seriously, why the fuck did Oxhorn make this pot shot against Obsidian when it was uncalled for and not even relevant to his video? The only reason someone would do that is if they're a biased fanboy or they're a paid shill. And the fact he's able to get away with selling merchandise with Bethesda's intellectual property on it without them suing him proves he must be a paid shill. If someone like me were to start selling merchandise with Bethesda's IP on it, you can be sure I'd receive a cease and desist letter telling me to stop at once. But they let him do it and invite him to private events. So you know there's more going on here than him just being a fanboy. Bethesda wants him to bash Obsidian, and he is more than happy to oblige. Number 2, he reads the sign outside of the school and says this is saying class was dismissed early the day before the bombs fell, October 23rd, 2077. But is that really what it says here? I see November on there. Maybe I'm reading it wrong. I don't know. A lot of the letters are missing from it anyway. Number 3, he notes that the copy of Duck and Cover on the desk near the terminal is abnormally large, and claims that it is the only abnormally large copy of it in the entire game, and that all other copies are smaller. According to the Fallout Wiki, this is false. The Wiki says there are actually 3. This isn't a big deal, but I just thought I'd point that out. Number 4, he says he counts 10 child skeletons on the floor in the jail cell, and to be fair, that's how many I also count when I paused his video. But in my own game, I counted 11 skeletons. And since I didn't use any mods in my game, I trust that my total is likely to be more correct. Again, it's not really a big deal. I'm also not sure I agree with his conclusion that the children were mowed down with bullets because bullets tend to leave, bullet holes in the wall, and we don't see that. But in addition, why would you waste bullets, which ought to be scarce and highly valuable, in order to kill children that you have at your mercy? I think it's more likely they were killed with some sort of melee weapon, or, since we do know that raiders often keep dogs, they may have used dogs to maul the children to death. I'd consider that to be more likely. But anyway, aside from these things, I didn't have any issue with his video. Well, other than the fact that for some reason he modded Lucas Sims to be white.
Lucas Sims, the very man who sold us our Megaton home.
Now, let's turn our focus back to the school. The main entrance is unguarded, and you can just walk right in without any of the raiders seeing you coming. Note that when you approach the door to the school, you are facing east according to your compass. But upon actually entering the school, the compass will now say you are facing north. This is some strange bug. It may also explain another issue that I'll come to later on, but I just want you to take note of this for now. As you can see, there are no raiders guarding the immediate vicinity when you enter the school, just as there were none outside to observe your approach. This is extremely stupid because any threat to the raiders will most likely come through that entrance. Anything or anyone could come charging through that door, hell-bent on wiping them out. Not only the usual assortment of wasteland horrors, but the residents of Megaton. Lucas Sims and or Jericho might one day decide they've had enough of the bullshit and could form an armed posse to come and storm the school. Since the main entrance is completely undefended, the raiders would be taken by surprise and they'd be fucked. Or they could get attacked by mercenaries, either from or paid by the very same caravans that we are told but not shown that they routinely raid.
And I'm sorry, but we didn't need any of that information. That is just a massive exposition dump. That is pure telling, not showing. And I'm utterly baffled that managed to make it into the final game, because we don't need any of it.
Then there's the regulators, who have made it their job to hunt down bad guys just for the sake of it. So this school would be a prime target. But regardless of who it is, my point is the raiders are stupid for being ill-prepared for when that day comes. However, the back of the school is another story. According to the Fallout Wiki article, this portion of the school was destroyed by bombs during the Great War. This is what the wiki says, and although this is certainly possible, no citation whatsoever is given to back this up, and I can't find any actual evidence to support this. So it seems someone came to this assumption, added that to the wiki article, and it's remained there ever since, even though there's no citation to support it. So anyone who doesn't mind dealing with the asshole moderators on the wiki, please correct this issue, or petition them to correct it or something. Claiming that this destruction was caused during the war by bombs is only speculation, and speculation is not canon facts. Furthermore, the Raiders' own journal entry number 2 on the terminal says, quote, "Some of the scabs got tired of digging the tunnel and started using mines to get into the caves. Not a half-bad idea. The explosions damn near knocked the building apart. We got a new window or two on the side of the building. Ha ha. I'm going to have some of the boys knock over a caravan for some more explosives, but we'll have to use fewer in the blasts, or some assholes from Megaton will come looking." This terminal entry explicitly states that the use of explosives by the scabs in the tunnel caused destruction to the building. So, since this canon source of lore says this caused destruction to the building, and since we actually see where the building is destroyed, is it not logical, therefore, to connect the dots and conclude that this was caused recently by the raiders? Again, someone please either correct this on the wiki or petition the mods there to do it. I'm going to call out this crap each and every time I notice it, and my perception is pretty good, so I end up noticing a lot. I don't just simply read from the Fallout Wiki verbatim and unquestioningly like Oxhorn does. I check to see if what these articles say match up with the canon facts of the game, and in this case, it clearly doesn't. This is the difference between an actual lore video and someone just reading verbatim from the Fallout Wiki. The wiki isn't always right, and I'm calling it out right here and now. And if I were to try to correct this issue myself, the mods would just revert it and give me some bullshit. I've been through this crap many times before when dealing with these types of people, and I'm sick of it. So anyway, explosives used in the tunnels is the more likely cause of the destruction on the rear of the school based on this canon information. And for whatever reason, the raiders decided to rigorously protect this side of the school versus the main entrance at the front, which they do not defend at all. I don't know why, but that's the way it is, and it goes against all common sense. This side of the school faces the river, so it's a lot less likely there would be any attack from that direction compared to the front. While we are on the topic of the rear of the school, I'd like to briefly discuss this nearby electrical tower. It is surrounded by a fence, and you have to pick an easy lock to gate to get inside. Inside is a bunch of radioactive waste barrels, as well as some minor loot. I guess most notably here is a hunting rifle that's in terrible condition. But if you want to grab a hunting rifle very early on in the game, here you go. Normally, I don't care to bother talking about minor loot such as this, but I bring up this electrical tower because it's not a bad bit of world building, and it is consistent with that pre-war ethos, as explained by Fallout creator Tim Kaine, that you don't trust your government, and there's a lot of bad shit going on.
We loved making social commentary in Fallout. It's riddled with it. A big part of Fallout was you don't trust your own government. We made it quite clear that the government was lying to you, that there needs to be a check and balance, that the military needs to answer to civilians, because the military in the Fallout world pretty much took over. Corporations were taking over. I mean, you saw that the vault you were living in was built by Vault-Tec, and all the products in there were built by Vault-Tec, or a subsidiary of Vault-Tec. So your Pip-Boy, your Stealth Boy, everything was related to this one overarching, massively invasive company. We even had inside the Fallout manual, we had a page of describing other manuals you could buy from Vault-Tec, which made light of all the horrible things that could happen after nuclear war. And basically this company was making all of its profit off of people's fear of the war, and if a war actually happened, they planned to profit off of that as well. And I think we were just trying to comment that while this is all exaggerated, a lot of this is true in our own society. I don't think anybody doubts that, Halliburton profited off the Iraq War. Now it's profiting off of the BP oil spill. They just, it wouldn't hurt if that game or other games helped raise the consciousness of the players who played them just a little bit and made them look at their own governments and their own society just a little more critically.
Dumping radioactive waste barrels next to an elementary school is a perfect example of this. I know I'm mostly negative about Fallout 3 and Bethesda in general, but I'll give them credit on this one. Though they get a lot of things wrong about the franchise, I think this here does fit well with what Tim Kaine envisioned. The only thing detracting from it is I think Bethesda may overdo this to the extent that stuff like this is pretty much all that this game is. And when it's overdone, it has a desensitizing effect on the player. But I do think, in this specific case, it is a nice touch. Yes, it is a positive thing that there are all these radioactive waste barrels next to an elementary school. As for the loot inside of that school, I'll only discuss what is notable. There is a rare sheet music book in the southeastern classroom on the ground floor. This is useful for the quest Agatha's Song, and there are only 6 of these in the entire game. Only 1 is needed for completing the quest, though, so the others you may want to keep for house decorating or whatever. There is a copy of Duck and Cover on the desk near the terminal. It is one of the only 3 oversized copies of this book in the entire game, but it is not the size that counts. It's what you do with it, and what you do with it is you read it and you gain a skill point, or more if you have the relevant perk, and it works exactly the same as normal-sized copies of the book. In the tunnels below the school, there is a copy of the Chinese Spec Ops training manual, which boosts sneak skill. Why it happens to be there among the bodies of these dead wastelanders that the raiders were using as slave labor is anyone's guess. Perhaps these wastelanders are Chinese infiltrators. Who knows? And last, but certainly not least, there is a bottle of Nuka-Cola Quantum, which is almost impossible to miss atop a cage when you enter from the main entrance. These are very rare and might arguably be the most notable piece of loot in the entire school. As for why it would be up there on this cage, I have no explanation. But it seems to me that the raiders are idiots for leaving it there, as valuable as it is. But then again, we already know they're idiots because they aren't even guarding the entrance where you find it. What we do know from what it says on the terminal is that the raiders are supposedly raiding caravans as they come and go from Megaton. The game doesn't actually show this, but it tells us this here on this terminal under the very first journal entry, which reads as follows. Quote, Boppo died like a bitch. He didn't have half a bad idea setting up here. We had a good thing going, picking off caravans and traders on their way into Megaton. He was stupid to try and raid the town. Dumbass deserved the bullet Sims put in his head. Anyway, there's sweeter water to be had here. That damn vault's what we should be trying to get into, not that rag-ass town. If we can get in there, ain't none of us going to want again for the rest of our lives. End quote. Unlike most so-called lore channels, I'm not going to just read this and leave it at that. I'm going to break this down and share my thoughts on it. First off, I think Boppo sounds like the name of a clown. But clown or not, it apparently was his idea to set up in this school. Nothing is said about the school being occupied when the raiders showed up, so they must have found it completely abandoned. And it's probably remained abandoned like this ever since the war 200 years ago. I've already talked about how stupid it is that the people of Megaton chose to live in a hole instead of here, but aside from the people of Megaton, apparently no one in the entire wasteland chose to settle here during all this time, which makes no sense. It is a far better place to live than Megaton, for sure, and it's also a better place than most locations in the capital wasteland. And yet, it was just abandoned until Boppo led the raiders here. The entry says Boppo had a good idea, and yeah, he did. But why didn't anyone else before him? But despite having this good idea, Boppo apparently met his end when he tried to raid Megaton. If I'm not mistaken, there are some vague references to raiders causing trouble for Megaton, so it's probably referring to Boppo and his attack. Well, if Boppo wanted to conquer Megaton, what he should have done instead of raid the town is place it under siege. We know the town has no internal food supply, so the food it has must come from supply caravans. Cut them off, and the town should starve into submission. Even if Matton's argument that the mole rats behind the town are the food source, they're still outside the walls. Just don't let the people of Megaton get out there to them, and they have no food. And the water Megaton has is radioactive shit water. Walter's water treatment plant is a joke. Not only does it need a constant supply of scrap to remain in operation, which again, placing the town under siege would rob it of, but even with a supply of scrap and keeping that treatment plant running, the treated water is still no cleaner than other sources of water all over the wasteland. And that leads me to another very interesting sentence in this journal entry that I wish I knew of when I covered this in my response to Matton. Quote, "There's sweeter water to be had here." End quote. So, not only is the school a superior place than Megaton for all the reasons I've previously mentioned, but apparently so is the water. And this superior water also doesn't require Walter's treatment plant either. It's just already better. And this is something which I had noted in part 3 of my response to Megaton, where I showed the rads of the fire hydrants in Springvale, as well as the huge-ass water tower, which is directly in front of players when they immediately exit from Vault 101. Megaton praises that scenic overview, but he is so clueless that he somehow missed this huge fucking water tower and didn't have anything to say about it. Well, that water tower, which I guess is technically part of Springvale, has far cleaner water than Megaton. But even though the game clearly showed this, part of me kind of thought that this was some sort of ludonarrative dissonance, where even though mechanically this water is demonstrably purer than Megaton's water, it canonically isn't supposed to be. Well, that was before I seen this terminal entry. The fact that the raiders themselves confirm that their water is sweeter than Megaton's water is the final nail in the coffin of Megaton's argument that the basis of the town is that the bomb left a crater down to groundwater. Bullshit. Cleaner water is right nearby, and the imbeciles in Megaton allowed the raiders to just waltz right in and take it. Just like Joe Biden allowed the Taliban to waltz right in and take $85 billion worth of American weapons and equipment. Now, considering that the raiders have a superior water source than nearby Megaton, if these raiders were actually smart, they would stop being raiders and start being businessmen and start selling their superior water. And the caravans would stop going to Megaton with its shitty-ass toilet water and instead go to Springvale, which would then become the major trade hub on the trade network, leaving Megaton to rot on the vine. That's how it should have been if the raiders were smart and used their sweeter water to their advantage. But clearly they're not smart, so instead they came up with a new harebrained scheme to dig into Vault 101. While it is true that Vault 101 is relatively close to Springvale, it should be noted the world map is definitely not to scale, and in reality it's probably several miles away from the school, maybe more than that. Digging tunnels involves a lot of work and a lot of hazards of cave-ins and so on, especially when dug with crude hand tools like these tunnels undoubtedly are. The amount of time and effort it would take to dig a tunnel all the way to Vault 101 would probably take centuries. That is, of course, assuming they were even tunneling in the correct direction, which, according to the compass, they're not. They actually appear to be tunneling in the opposite direction, away from Vault 101. Remember what I said earlier about the compass glitch inside the school? Maybe they actually are heading in the right direction after all, but it just seems not due to that glitch. I don't know. But even if it's the right direction, the distance is ridiculous. If they really wanted to tunnel into the vault, they should have started digging the tunnel right next to the vault instead of miles away. For instance, why not dig your tunnel inside of the cave Vault 101 exits into, where all the skeletons are located with picket signs asking to be let in? Just set up your raider base inside of this cave and start tunneling from there. If they had started from here, then they'd already be in the vault by now. And even if the people inside Vault 101 were aware they were there and trying to tunnel, what the hell could they even do about it? In order to stop them, the people in the vault would have to open the huge-ass door to confront them, and the moment they do that, the more numerous and better-armed raiders could rush in and slaughter them. If these raiders had done things this way, Vault 101 would have been screwed either way. They'd have been screwed if they did nothing and waited as the raiders tunneled in, and they would have been even more screwed if they opened the door to try and stop them. I get it that nothing can cut or blast through the heavy-ass vault door, But that's why I'm saying that from this cave, just tunnel under or around that door and then cut or blast your way in through the floor or the walls. And if you can't even blast or cut through the floor or the walls of Vault 101, then this entire tunneling endeavor was a futile effort from the start anyway. But all I'm saying is that if you're going to try this, you may as well try it from point blank instead of 10 miles away where you have to dig a long-ass tunnel that will never be finished within a human lifespan. So, long story short, the tunnel thing is stupid for a number of reasons. It's also stupid when you consider that when you dig a tunnel, you then have to do something with the dirt that you dug. Just because you dug it doesn't mean it automatically disappears on its own. You have to move it and dump it somewhere to get it out of the way. Yet there's nothing shown that indicates where the dirt is being hauled to. So that's another issue with this whole thing. And how are they digging and hauling this dirt? There are no shovels, picks, or digging implements of any kind, nor carts or wheelbarrows either. There is, however, a broken refrigerator down there, which makes no sense at all. The tunnels are all dead ends, but out of curiosity I used the TCL console command to proceed beyond what I was supposed to, and as expected, there wasn't any hidden secrets or anything. But you never know. The second journal entry on the terminal reads as follows. Some of the scabs got tired of digging the tunnel and started using mines to get into the caves. Not a half-bad idea. The explosions damn near knocked the building apart. We got a new window or two on the side of the building. Ha ha. I'm going to have some of the boys knock over a caravan for some more explosives, but we'll have to use fewer in the blasts or some assholes from Megaton will come looking. I assume the word scabs refers to the wastelanders that the raiders are using as slave labor. It seems strange to trust slave laborers with explosives. After all, this clearly didn't work out very well for the NCR when it came to the powder gangers, right? As I previously noted, this journal entry says the explosion damn near knocked the building apart, and I believe that this is the cause of the damage to the building. The wiki, however, says otherwise. But the wiki also provides no citation, and let's not forget that anyone can edit a wiki. Clearly someone did, and there it is, but there's no evidence. Here, however, we have this journal entry, and that counts as evidence, so I trust this over what the wiki says on the matter. Thinking about this a bit further, I wonder if the so-called scabs might have actually intended to destroy the school deliberately. They are slaves, after all. Even if bringing down the school would have caused their own demise, it would have also brought the demise of the raiders as well, so the scabs might have considered that a worthy sacrifice to make. They would be free in death. Plus, they would have their revenge by taking the raiders out with them. So this mishap could have been an accident, or it could have been on purpose as a slave rebellion of sort. It could also be the case that the reason the tunnel is heading in the opposite direction from the goal of Vault 101 is due to the slaves who are digging this tunnel deliberately, sabotaging it. It may be because they want to save the inhabitants of Vault 101 from experiencing a similar fate. Of course, this is all just speculation on my part. Feel free to believe as you wish or come up with your own theories. Another thing that is interesting of note with this entry is the raiders saying they need to use fewer explosives in the future or else assholes from Megaton will come looking. This is interesting to note because it shows they do recognize that a posse from Megaton is a threat to them, and yet even though they acknowledge this, they do not guard or patrol the front of the school. The third and final journal entry reads, quote, "Hit a goddamned hive of ants in the tunnel. Bastards ate 7 of our best diggers before we could lock off the way in. need to find some way to poison them so we can keep digging and blast into that vault. If we don't get there soon, I think I'm going to end up like Boppo, except it won't be the sheriff popping me, it's going to be my own men. These entries were written by the new and current Raider leader, who Bethesda writers, most likely Emil, were unable to conjure some sort of name for. Random name generators do exist, and I'm sure they also did in the 2000s when this game was made, so there's no excuse for the Raider leader to not have a name other than laziness. And the previous leader, who they did give a name, was given a clown name. This is the mindset of the people that made this game. Anyway, this final journal entry suggests the Raiders are likely getting fed up with the lack of success from this new leader. He says Boppo died like a bitch, but Boppo died in battle. Isn't that the best way to die? Dying in battle is how Vikings go to Valhalla and shit, right? I know these Raiders aren't literal Vikings, but they still kinda are. Boppo, the clown, died in battle, but this guy senses that he may be shot by his own men. Raiders aren't democracies. They don't impeach their leaders. They remove incompetent or ineffective leaders the old-fashioned way, and this nameless new leader is likely to eventually meet that fate because his tunnel scheme is a failure and, frankly, was a dumb idea from the start, given the distance. And that's pretty much all I have to say on these journal entries. They are pretty much what I've come to expect of Bethesda and their writers. I don't think in this case it's so much bad writing as it is laziness. There should have been more journal entries going into more detail. It would have been interesting to see entries from the time of Boppo and hear what that clown had to say of things, and what the state of the school was when he arrived there. Was anyone else already occupying the school? I assume the answer is no, because there's nothing to indicate that, but there's also nothing to completely rule it out either. My original purpose for making this entire video was to try to figure out the reason why there are jail cells in this school, and after looking over all the available information I can find, I still have no better understanding from when I started. These lackluster lore dumps on the terminal are the only insights we have, and they are severely lacking. The real treasure to me when exploring dungeons such as this is the lore surrounding it. Most people only care about the loot, but even the loot in this school is underwhelming. There's a couple skill books and a Nuka Quantum, and that's about it. This was a fairly decent sized building too, and you'd think it would have taken someone at Bethesda a decent amount of time to create this dungeon, and yet it doesn't really add much to the game. It exists in its own segregated bubble, isolated from nearby Megaton, and isolated even from Sarah Silver, who is right next door. Sure, they tell you that they raid caravans and the like, but this is only telling, and it is not shown. Frankly, for all the raiding of caravans that they supposedly do, wouldn't you expect the loot in this dungeon to be a lot greater? Caravans carry around a lot of trade goods, and I assume that's where the Nuka Quantum came from. But why isn't there anything else? Merchants have lots of caps, but where are these if the raiders are taking it? From what is told to you but not shown, you'd expect some sort of treasure trove of hundreds, if not thousands of caps. And yet, there's absolutely nothing. The Nuka Quantum, despite how rare and valuable it is just left laying around unguarded, as if it were a piece of garbage. I feel whoever at Bethesda created this dungeon really shat the bed. They clearly put some time and work into it, but it fails to feel like a real or believable part of this world. It completely and utterly fails when it comes to shandification. So now I'm back at square one. Why are these jail cells here? Why are there skeletons of children inside them? Your guess is as good as mine, but I doubt that these cells were something the raiders added in, and I'll explain why. First of all, these are skeletons, and they look like they've been there for a very, very long time. Since Bappo and company arrived in the school only recently, it hasn't been enough time for the flesh to completely rot away. But maybe this is just an oversight, and maybe they are meant to be more recent. After all, there are no models of child corpses in the game, so if a dev wanted to depict dead children, they would have no choice but to use skeletons, regardless of how recently deceased they're supposed to be. And these skeletons are not anatomically correct children's skeletons. For their size, children have disproportionately larger skulls than adults. Yet, the skulls on these skeletons are proportionate to their size. Essentially, they are the same as adult skeletons, just reduced in size, similar to how that duck and cover book was oversized. The logical assumption is these are meant to be children, but there is also a possibility they could be some sort of race of pygmies that the raiders captured and killed. In the real world, in the present day, there are races of pygmies that live in the jungles of the Congo in Africa, and Bantus often enslave and sometimes cannibalize these pygmies. That could be what is going on here. These skeletons may represent a race of pygmies that once lived in the area, but perhaps were hunted to extinction by the raiders. It is a possibility. The original Fallouts did have a race of dwarfs, which, for whatever reason, have never made a reappearance in the modern Fallouts. I've heard a suggestion that Todd Howard doesn't like dwarf races because he is very short himself, and he is sensitive about it, so he made the dwarves in the Elder Scrolls extinct after he took over the studio. And so it may also be the case with the Fallout dwarves as well. These skeletons we see here may be all that remains of the race of dwarves on the East Coast. So where did this race of pygmies come from? I posit they may have been the inhabitants of Rhacopolis, which was raided by slavers led by Penelope Chase, and then, for some reason or other, ended up here in these cages. Nothing was ever said that the people of Rhacopolis were pygmies, but then again, nothing also was ever said that they weren't pygmies either, and I always had this sense that they probably were pygmies. These skeletons must be pygmies, because they can't be children, because children in Fallout never die, and these skeletons are clearly dead. Is it also not illegal for a game to depict dead children in certain countries, like Germany? So if these are children's skeletons, and they are in the German version of Fallout 3, then Bethesda broke the law by not censoring them. But if these instead are the corpses of pygmies, then no German law was broken, and everything is A-okay. But all joking aside, these most likely really are just the corpses of children, as most people would assume. And since this is an elementary school, it's the sort of skeletons you would expect to find there. My best guess is that whoever it was at Bethesda that designed this dungeon, on one hand, knew they were designing a school, and on the other hand, it's also a raider base. Without thinking it through logically, they then conflated these two things together to create this mashup, which doesn't make any sense. That's what I consider the most likely explanation. While people just assume that the jail cells are something raiders added in recently, I have some serious doubts about this. For one thing, this jail cell in particular is built into a recess, as if the building was designed to have this from the beginning. Also, look at how rusted these bars are. They've clearly been there for a long time, and not something added within the last year. I could accept that there would be blacksmiths in the post-apocalypse who could create iron bars and such like this. However, the locking mechanism on the door seems to be more elaborate than something a crude raider blacksmith could create. If the raiders did add this themselves, it must have been something they stole from some other pre-war building in the wasteland. But where? And why does it so conveniently fit into this recess as if the building were designed for it? And why would ancient children's skeletons be placed in that cell? The raiders could have found those skeletons and placed them in that cell, but why would they do that? Maybe this was done as a sort of Potemkin village in order to intimidate or impress their slaves or their new raider recruits. Maybe it was to create a fictional narrative that they've been occupying this schoolhouse since the time of the war. Perhaps the blood we see on the wall is merely paint. Maybe those aren't even actual real skeletons at all. Maybe they're Halloween decorations because, as we all know, it was almost Halloween at the time when the bombs fell. Maybe this whole entire jail cell is just a decoration the school put there to celebrate Halloween for the entertainment of children. Or perhaps it is a Potemkin village created for the entertainment of the player and isn't meant to make any logical sense. I don't know, but let me know what you think in the comments below. And thank you for watching. If you like this video, please share it on socialist media.
Who built the cages, Joe?
Let's talk about what
Who
we're
built the
talking about.
cages,
Let's
Joe?
talk about what we're talking about.